I want to welcome you to this week's episode of the CVC Home Service Success Network, sponsored by CVC Success Group. And it'll be myself, Cheryl, Josh Kelly as normal. And today we have a guest on that has a lot of expertise in the area of our subject today. What I'm going to call being a very a very expert in safety there, and that's Bob Ferrari. He's the education director for the National Chimney Sweep Guild, but he's also taught a lot of safety classes over the years, a lot of rope safety training. So, anyway, what brought this subject up today is earlier this week, Josh Kelly shared a news story that happened up in this area where two workers were on a roof. Their ladder contracted an electrical line. They were electrocuted. And after they were electrocuted, they burnt for an hour laying on the ground. Just think about that. That's got to be horrible. You know, a year or two ago, we had Clay Lamb on here who had a fatality from electricity also with workers on scaffolding. So I'm going to share the link to that during today's broadcast. But anyway, Cheryl, you wanted to do this. So what was your thoughts on why we want to talk about safety today?
Well, it caught my eye because I read Josh's article also, and we had dealt with Clay. There are so many things that cause dangers out, especially we are niched more into the chimney service industry, but it covers every industry. There are people that are falling off roofs. They're not getting the training they needed. And I'm glad you brought Bob on here because he has a lot of experience in what we're doing. But the main thing is people get hurt, but if you can halfway control it, that's a whole lot. I mean, I remember when chimney sweeps didn't wear helmets. Now they're wearing climbing helmets. So certain industries are definitely working on safety. And another thing that brought it on when it did, I had three retirees ask me right in a row, is this company safety oriented? So I thought this would be a good comment for today.
Okay. So, Josh, what are you looking for in today's episode? What do you want? What's the message you want to get out today in this episode? Josh, your mic, you're muted, bud.
Sorry, someone's feeding back, and I didn't want it to be me.
No, that's why I cut Bob off. Bob, you're feeding back some. I'm gonna cut your mic on and off. I don't know what's going on with it. Go ahead, Josh.
Like I said, I knew exactly where that church was. Those two guys, died at. I've been in that neighborhood thousands of times. It certainly, was a reminder about, where to set your ladder. That's in what ladders to use, and safety as a function of the company.
Gotcha.
As every day, as I told my guys, I said, there's nothing here that's worth dying over.
Yeah.
If we lose a little money because it takes longer and you don't die, we'll take it back. We'll learn from it and go from there.
Gotcha. So anyway, I just got this edition of Sweeping Magazine from National Chimney Sweep Guild came in yesterday, and there's a picture here, Bob. You're on the cover, Bob, where you're actually training down in Houston, Texas. I believe this was at Lord's Chimney when you were doing rope training. But from the aspect of being the education director, how important is safety if you're going to run a company and home service today? I'm going to cut your mic back on now. Whoops. Can't get him unmuted. There you go, Bob. Now go.
Sorry about that. I'm having all kinds of technical differences here. So yeah, a lot of times when we think about safety, the big sexy one is fall protection. But really, and what Josh just said, there's nothing worth dying for. There's really nothing worth being injured for, period. And we don't always think about that. We're tough, we cut ourselves. We've had all kinds of, I myself have all kinds of stories. I've got cut the tendon in my thumb with a skill saw. I've had stitches in my eyelid while cutting out a damper with a mask on. All of us have stories about that. One of my employees got a little cut on his knuckle, and it was nothing. You put some antiseptic on it and that sort of thing, and it ended up getting infected. A month later, we're going to workman's comp. His hand swelled up. He couldn't work for weeks, and it was nothing. It was just a little cut. So safety, that impacts his income. It impacts the company. It impacts our customers, and none of it impacts in a good way.
No, it definitely doesn't. So you've been traveling around a lot doing training for both independently, and then when you work for the National Guild, now you're doing a lot of traveling, training, doing ropes training, that type of stuff. How receptive are people to this training when you go out, Bob?
Well, they show up. Those that show up are receptive. They want it. And those who don't, think that it's not important or that they already know all about it. I've been trained in all different kinds of safety, from being on mountain rescue. I was a swift water rescue, rescue 1 and rescue 2, things that you talk about safety. You talk about what happens when, there's been an accident, because nobody's going out or getting up in the morning thinking, I'll just go get myself hurt today. They're accidents. They're things that we're not thinking of. And quite often they're the things that in the moment we take a shortcut, or we want to keep the job going, or we got to get to the kids' soccer game. And rather than taking the time, we push through, and then suddenly here we are, hurt. The people who are receptive to it kind of understand that. And the more we talk about it, the more it's at the forefront of our awareness. So showing up is good because it does that, and you become receptive.
Got you. So Cheryl, what questions would you ask Bob about the matter of safety and the need for safety training, those type of things?
Bob, I know it's all important. Every aspect of it's important. But if you had to choose one area that you deem more important than others, what would that one be?
Culture.
True.
Safety is a culture. It's not just a bunch of practices or somebody looking to fulfill rules, which is how we often look at it. It's just a bunch more rules that screw us up trying to get our job done today. But a culture of care, a culture of safety. I've been 2,000 feet up a rock wall in Yosemite with a partner, and we checked each other's harnesses. We'd been climbing for days together and hours, and we had enough experience. But even with all that experience, we check each other. We care for each other. That's culture. And if you have that, the rest of it all starts to fall into place. Those guys in that horrible story that was just awful, that Josh posted about the electrocution. When you walk onto a job, you do a hazard assessment. And one of them is you look at the power lines. And of course, they weren't experienced in that. But what if they were? What if there was instead a culture there where you first looked around to see what could hurt you? Maybe it could have been averted.
Yeah. So Josh, what about you? What would you ask Bob, or what would you want him to talk about here in the area of safety, Josh?
What about building a safety handbook, training policies? What does that kind of look like? Training videos?
So the NCSG safety manual is due to be published I don't know. I keep saying any minute, but those minutes seem to stretch. It takes longer than I think. But the one that we wrote, not only, Jerry's got a great book out on safety, but it doesn't just cover the kinds of things that could happen, but there's also the stories of what's happened to other people. And I think sometimes reading those stories and hearing those stories are more important than just having a list of all the possible things that can go wrong. Once you become aware, you've seen the picture of the guy with the grinding wheel that broke off and stuck in his forehead. That has a heck of a lot of impact when you go and pick up that grinder to go do something. That's what you don't want to be, and they stick in your mind, they stick in your memory, and I think being able to tell stories in graphic ways, in a positive sense, like here's how you can avoid that. There's a real learning experience in that. The American Alpine Guide Association publishes quarterly accidents in American mountaineering, and a lot of them are tragedies. You can learn so much from the mistakes of others, and it's only a person that's not humble, doesn't understand our own personal blind spots, who can't learn from the mistakes of others.
Right. And you mentioned the book we wrote, Bob. It was called Safety for the Service Technician. Wrote that with with Robbie Murphy was a co-author on that from Hudson Valley Chimney. But we tried to cover, as we did the research into that, we actually covered all over 70 different safety issues. And the problem is it really doesn't cover them all. There's still always going to be more things and more things that are going to come up. So you mentioned it was a culture. So how does a company develop a culture of safety, Bob? What do they do?
Well, it starts at the top. It's if our leadership style is do what I say, not what I do, then that's going to be the culture. Nobody's ever going to follow it. Everybody's going to do what they want. I didn't start off wearing helmets. I did start off using ropes because I had a mountaineering background, but of course only on steep roofs, places where I thought it was necessary, and not even all the time there. I've scared myself plenty of times, and most of us have. We've climbed up something that we now have to climb down, which is much harder. But when I began getting employees that didn't have my background, and the more employees I got, the more exposure was. They didn't have my background. They didn't have my set of skills. They didn't have my awareness. They didn't have my experience. And so my exposure to risk began to grow as I got employees. And it only takes one who doesn't think about the job the way you think about the job. And so I would have them do things, but I needed to do those things. I needed to put a helmet on every time I got out of my truck and went up a ladder. That's what I required of them. And I didn't always. Sometimes I just wasn't thinking. I wasn't on the jobs anymore. I was going out and checking them. And what would happen is I finally carried a $100 bill in my pocket. And I said, you guys catch me climbing the ladder one step without a helmet, you get a $100 bill. And I only had to fail a couple of times before I started to remember, but it also made a team out of it, that I was holding them accountable, but now they could hold me accountable.
Okay. Well, Bob, let me ask you another question, because you've been involved very much, because OSHA now has an agreement with the NCSG for safety in our trade. Can you give us a summary of what this ruling says we need to do as everyday business owners?
Well, first off, the agreement with OSHA only had to do with fall protection. But the way we wrote it into our safety manual, we decided to write it within the context of an entire safety manual, so that and wrote it in a way that an employer could use it as their company safety manual, so that if OSHA shows up, you can go, well, here's our safety. This is how we approach it. We're trying to create the national standard. This is the way that we do it. Our industry approaches safety this way. These are our standards. And that hasn't been done before. We've never presented it that way because there's still things that we depart from the OSHA agreement. Some of the wins that we got in it were that we could use trees, we could use ground-based anchors, we could use framing, we could use cars. A lot of the problems had to do with needing engineered anchors and somebody having to crawl up and first man up and then screw something into the roof to make it work. And it just didn't work in the residential service world. So we got some significant wins being able to use a ladder on the roof to access the top of a chimney. Wasn't there before. You couldn't do that. The ladder had to be set on a flat surface. And now for us, for chimney sweeps, it doesn't. So in our real world, day in, day out jobs, we got some real significant wins. But it also put us on their radar so that they're looking for us. We're in the top 10 trades that OSHA wants to check. And they're not going to check the fly-by-night guys in the rust bucket trucks. They're going to check the guys with nice paint who pull permits and who are out there. And even there, since it's only really for service work, not construction, as far as the agreement with OSHA, it still would be hard for them just to catch a guy doing a sweep for a couple hours at somebody's house. But there's disgruntled employees, there's competition that turn you in, and then they show up. And that's how it quite often happens, unless you've had an accident, and then all bets are off.
Yeah, when you have an accident, all bets go off at that point, which a lot of people have found out the hard way from that. Or you've had a drive-by inspection. I know some years ago we were cited from a drive-by inspection where they just rode by the job site and they were taking photos, and then we got notified by mail. We got a big fine. We had to go through a lot of processes from there. So, Cheryl, what about you? What else would you want to discuss with Bob today on this episode on safety?
Bob, excuse me, I like your idea of the culture thing. A lot of it, and I think I'm right, is people just, number one, think it's not going to happen to me. And number two, they just don't think about it. Like you forgot a couple times going up the ladder too. So do you think that's the bigger of the problem than people just being totally obstinate about it?
Yeah, I don't think anybody's super obstinate about it. I think we have habits and we have biases. And the bias that it won't happen to me or isn't likely to happen is a pretty big one in human nature. And we should take human nature into consideration when we're writing rules and things. You can have all the rules you want. If nobody does anything about it, what's the point? Let's figure out how we can make it work. And I think the trades are in general, and chimney sweeps in particular, are changing as our businesses grow, as we get realize we have employees and that they're a valuable asset. We don't want them to get hurt. We don't want to go through the fines and hassles and all of that. But beyond that, it just doesn't, it's bad customer service to get injured. It's terrible. The customer's not going to get served. The company then doesn't make any money, and the employee can't work. I mean, it's just a lose all the way around. So I feel like it's changing. I grew up, we never wore a bicycle helmet. I don't go onto my bike without a helmet. I don't. And I've crashed significant enough times. I've had numbers of concussions. I think over my life, I've had 5 major concussions, not all from, cycling or something else. Some of them were when I was a child. But we wear a helmet, and it's no big deal. In fact, to not wear a helmet makes you look like some homeless wino or something riding a bike around. It's like, oh, they don't wear a helmet, they must be stupid.
Yeah. Gotcha. So, Josh, what about you? Anything you would like to bring up with Bob? Because I got a couple questions for him when you get done.
No, I would say about putting together your own training manual. you know, because I know it's how hard it is to sit down and write SOPs, but like make videos, you know, tell, you know, are you doing videos? Do you guys have reference videos, things like that for people to use instead of, you know, to get a technician this day and age to sit down and read
Well,
is the
I have
easiest.
in my presentations, I certainly have videos because we tested anchors to see how much force you have to. Unfortunately, you can't take all the thinking out of it. We had a saying in our company: if you don't think too good, try not to think too much. But we still have to think some, and you have to be able to size up a job. Will this anchor hold me or not? Especially when we're using natural anchors and having to evaluate it. And so we did testing. We had force meters and jumped down roofs and saw how much force we put on to an anchor. How much force did we put on a harness compared to what OSHA was requiring, so that we could make educated judgments. And we do show that. We do teach that. We do train people to that. More videos with Lee Roth coming on as our marketing guys. There's going to be more videos coming out. The manual that we wrote is really written to be able to be used as SOPs, because I know how hard they are to write as well. I always say that when I wrote mine under Al Levy, it was like having white hot needles put in my eyes. So we try to make it easier for employers, because ultimately employers are responsible. If you're an employer, and that means if you have one part-time person that helps out once in a while, you're an employer and you're 100% responsible. If you're a larger company and have a safety manager and put them in charge of all of this, and somebody gets hurt, the employer is still the one who's responsible. So it means we have to take ownership of it and be the directors of our own destiny and how we're going to apply the rules.
Yeah. So, Bob, let me ask you a question. If you look at this, if you look at the regulations, there's a word there you see of competent persons. And competent persons, if we look at a home service company, chimney sweeping in particular, does that mean we got to have a competent person on staff, or does it mean we got to have a competent person on the job site?
They have to be on the job site. And the way I did that, I mean, I had an in-house training program, and every guy that I sent out, the very first thing we did was ladder safety and fall protection, because I couldn't get them up on a roof until I had done that training. And then they were designated as a competent person for that particular skill. They could put on a harness, they could set an anchor, they could go up and move up and down a rope safely. It's also a competent person that's not just generalized per se, it's per job. So if you've got a guy that's competent on a 4 and 12 pitch ranch style house, they may not be competent on a 21 and 12 pitch, 3-story Victorian house. And that has to come into play. But you have to designate a competent person. And since in my company for service work, we worked alone a lot, that guy had to be a competent person and qualified. And I had to designate him so, and I did.
Got you covered. I understand. And like I said, there's a lot of resources we provide. I showed you the book a while ago, Your Safety for the Service Technician. This is on Amazon. Also, I looked this morning, and we have a pile of courses on our virtual academy, the CVC Virtual Academy. In fact, Bob has recorded a lot of his videos. They're on our platform also, where people can go on there to access them. And then I looked, and one of the ideas that Bob gave me a few years ago was that we needed tidbit training, which are very small micro courses. So I counted this morning, we have 37 micro courses on health and safety on our online platform, because I think it's very important that you have your safety meetings and have some content to use in this. So Cheryl, you got anything else for Bob while we're on here?
Not for Bob, but I've got it for the people out there that may not have companies. Not
Okay.
only do you need safety on the job site, you need to look around about the safety features in your home, your electrical safety, the things that you do kind of stupid, like I'll qualify. I went down my steps here about 2 years ago, decided I was on the bottom step, realized when I got myself off the ground, there was one more step. So people need to think before they do things. If I can do it, anybody can do it. So I just want to put that out to the general populace. It's not just companies.
Yeah, Bob, so you're aware, when she was doing wallpaper, that woman would do some really stupid stuff in people's houses, putting ladders on stairwells, leaning. I mean, it was really, in her younger days, she weren't the safest worker in the wallpaper world. Believe me, she would have never made the cover of Wall Coverings Monthly for sure with her safety practice. So,
You can
Bob,
actually turn a 2x4 sideways and walk it as a walkboard.
yeah, right. So,
Well,
Josh,
we talk about that, and what Cheryl brings up is important. That we talk about what happens out in the field. What about office safety? What about emotional safety? What about animal safety? What about there's a lot of other realms that are a different kind of safety than just what's happening out in the field that we tend to focus on.
Okay. So, Bob, Chuck Roadhouse has asked a question I put up on the screen. Can you talk about documenting the training and record keeping? What is that an important facet of the company operation?
Yes, it has to be written down. Okay, so we know we have the saying, if it's not written, it's not real. And in this case, it's absolutely 100% true. Training, you have a tidbit in the morning, you should write it down, and it should go into the file of the trainings that you supplied, who was there, what date it was, and what you covered. And you need to do that. That's required by OSHA. But the very first thing that they're going to do is look for that. What have you done? Where's your safety manual? What are your SOPs on it? And how have you trained people to it? You have to train somebody before they use a Sawzall. You have to train somebody before they start typing and get a wrist injury from repetitive work. They have to be trained in that, and it's the employer's responsibility. So yeah, recording that and providing that training is 100% necessary, and writing it down and keeping a file of it.
Fantastic. Josh, you got anything further on this subject?
Well, my question was going to be sort of related to Chuck's, was about what are some strategies to implement these safety policies?
Well, again, implementation is, in my opinion, comes from the top down. You've got to build it. You've got to model it. You've got to also write it down and be clear about it and show what it is. The hard part with it isn't the new guy that you hire. The hard part is the old guys that have been working for you for a long time. They've got the habits. They don't want to have to change. It doesn't fit. And especially a technician who's used to doing things, but also office workers, they get used to their routine and how they do it. And now we're interrupting it and we're changing it. And that kind of change is very hard for a lot of people to embrace. So that means that it's got to be clear. It's got to be written. We have to train to it. And then we have to check up on people and inspect it to see that it's being done the way that we want it done.
Yeah. And and this does take time, and we got to realize that. I mean, there's a construction project going on right up the street from us, laying pipelines, and all the safety stuff that's up there. They probably could have done this work in half the time it's taken them, but they've had to take all these steps. Like there's power lines up there. You got the signs all up down the street where there's power lines. They can't go down in the ditch unless they got the guard down into the ditch, because the ditch may collapse on them. And so, but it is something that you do have to do. And believe me, the last thing you want to do, earlier I posted a link to our interview with Clay Lamb, and go listen to that, because Clay is a guy that actually suffered a fatality in his company, and he can share with you what it's like in that interview when you go through this. So, Bob, anything else you want to add before we sign out of this episode?
Well, no, thank you for that. Come and we'll let you guys know when the new safety manual that can be used for your SOPs comes out, hopefully before I'm going to be traveling for almost a whole month. I'll be on the road teaching ropes and house pressure across the country, Colorado, Ohio, Chicago, Kentucky. It's all on the ncsg.org calendar. So if you're looking for the training, the way that we're going about doing it, the way I wrote it, instead of trying to train a whole team, although we can at those times, we want to train your competent person who can come back then and train your people. A train the trainer kind of program is ideal, because that's the only thing that's going to work in the real world. When we hire somebody and need to train them immediately, we don't have time to wait a few months till there's a rope class near us.
Yeah.
So you need somebody on staff, whether it's you or somebody else, and that's what we're trying to provide.
Got you covered. Well, friend, good luck on your travels. We all know that, you and airlines schedules sometimes are really bad. So best of luck. It sounds like you're going to be on a lot of planes. So best of luck on that one, brother.
Actually, I'm going to be driving.
You're going to be driving. Okay. Okay. Well, listen, we appreciate you joining us today on this episode of the CVC Home Service Success Network. We hope this information has been of value to you. Hey, let us know how we can help you. It's all about taking your business to the one you dream of and making your dreams your reality. We're CVC Success Group, and that's what we do. Appreciate you joining us. We'll see you next week on our next episode. Have a fantastic weekend, and it is Mother's Day, so celebrate your